Good evening. You're watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Kirk. I'm with David Frank. We are talking news of the day. And some of the news, this is not like an immediate story. It's something that's been going on for quite a while. It's actually gone on for the last few elections since 2020. Actually, it harkens back to the Brooks Brothers riot back in 2000, counting the ballots. But the topic for our first segment is election worker intimidation. Election workers are quitting all over the country. They're getting burned out. Election officials are leaving their posts because they are getting intimidations, everything from death threats to numerous records requests that make it impossible for them to do their job, to comply when they have to comply, to people following. When one woman in New York City just went out to take a break from her job and went for a walk, and this guy was with a camera in her face, accusing her of all kinds of things, and then worst of all, in Nevada, a woman in Winnebago County received threats, constant threats from this one individual who was basically, according to her, was telling her, I hope you die. You're a traitor. And 3 calls within 15 minutes. She tried to get help from the police, and the police are saying that there's nothing they could do about it, that it's there's no crime, it's his constitutionally protected speech. But we have laws for other things that protect teachers from intimidation, that protect other people. If Nevada hasn't passed any laws that prevents intimidation of election workers, then that's a real problem right there. But this is going on. This is massive. It may slow down the vote counting in places. There are a lot of people that are absolutely convinced that Joe Biden stole the election somehow in 2020. We've got a bunch of lawsuits going out. My Pillow guy, who was in Eureka recently, is a big part of that, encouraging people to make records requests, by the way, multiple ones against the thing, almost like he's encouraging harassment. And, there's no evidence. There were 60 lawsuits, every one of them dismissed, some of them by Trump appointed judges. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about here. Is this going to affect the outcome? So in some places, not as many as they'd hoped. Some election deniers have gotten themselves into public offices. They're applying for jobs. Is this going to have any impact on it? And then you've got the poll watchers, as they're called, showing up. And to some older Black people in the South, it's reminiscent of poll watchers there to intimidate Black people from voting back in the 50s and 60s. So a lot to discuss here. Dave, how would you like to start?
Yeah, so let's drill down a little bit, and sort of from the highest level. A brief survey of the literature on this shows that there have been ongoing election worker intimidation efforts and election disruption efforts since the 2020 election 2 years ago. So this is an underreported story, I would argue, and suddenly we're 5 weeks away from the election, and we're starting to see these things emerge. Maybe it's just fatigue that really affected people, or I'm not really sure exactly, but now it's back on our radar. I looked at a Pew Research report that was recently released for a different question we're going to cover, a different topic. But one of the data points that jumped out at me was that a majority of GOP voters have little or no confidence that the 2022 election will be conducted fairly. Versus, that it was like 55%. It was way more said, little confidence, very, very little confidence. But there was a significant portion, when you add that to the 0 to the no confidence, we're talking more than half people basically think elections are ripe for fraud.
Half the Republicans.
More than half the Republicans. Yep,
yeah.
55% it is.
Yeah.
But then with Democrats, it's only 17%. So that's kind of like if you look at the bell curve, and 85% of people kind of are going to usually fall in the same place. That's kind of how the universe works. So the fact that there's 17% outliers, that's not that unusual on any question or any topic. Even in science, there's outliers. So not that this isn't scientific, but because it's a survey, it is scientific. But so big picture, when you cut away, but besides the awful incidents of death threats, which we'll talk about, and surveillance and intimidation, bomb threats, besides all these things that have been happening post 2020, big picture, what it seems like a lot of the experts are saying is that limited or restricted voter access in the name of preventing voter fraud, that's been underway in many states across the country. So they've been actually on the legislative side, that's been happening, but it's also happening sort of in the streets, as it were. And here's a quote from the New York Times. With just 5 weeks left until Election Day on November 8th, a drumbeat of lawsuits, harassment, calls to change balloting procedures, and demands for reams of election records driven by people who mistrust or outright reject the idea that elections are fair are adding to pressures on election officials just as work in advance of the voting is peaking. And this is my end quote. But this last piece of my sort of intro here is, in an environment of reduced, this is all happening in an environment of reduced federal support for elections and cybersecurity. So it's in a sense, we sort of have a perfect storm brewing right under our noses, and it really hasn't gotten much attention. And what I'll let you comment on that. But when it comes back to me, there is a Vice special available online. I'm just going to let people know it's short. It's only about 11 minutes. But it's called "Death Threats Are Creating a Mass Exodus of Election Officials." So on top of all that, you've got many hundreds or thousands of people who are just saying, you know what, I'm going to sit this one out.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's a problem because there are shortages of election workers in some places. I mean, we're kind of blessed to be in Humboldt County. Humboldt County is probably one of the most transparently, clean places in the country, let alone the state. Because we've had two great election officials so far. We've had the Transparency Project that makes it so that you can actually see all of the ballots if you get the software and or the data, and you can even try to find your own ballot. I mean, if you know what it looked like, right? And it's just and it actually led to a correction at one time because of it. So we've got, and we also have election officials, both of them, and hopefully the incoming one, depending on who it is, that emphasizes access and enfranchisement over the obsession with the potential for fraud, which again, Trump started his commission on voter fraud, and they came up with so little. I think they came up with like 15 cases across the country, most of which were actually Republicans committing fraud. And then all of a sudden that committee just folded up and resisted Freedom of Information Act to get it. So there hasn't been a lot of election fraud, but they don't care. Right now we've got Dominion lawsuits. My Pillow is probably going to be writing as big a check as Alex Jones sometime soon, or being told they have to, but they find ways of getting out of it. But it's just the issue here. But on the other hand, it hasn't always been the right complaining about these things. Within the past couple of decades, the left brought up issues with Diebold, a Republican company,
Republican aligned.
Republican aligned company that had monopolies in certain states, including Ohio, and they were refusing to provide a paper trail. And I'm glad to see Republicans joining on the call for mandatory paper trails. Here we fill out our ballots and they go into the machines. We don't even necessarily have to have machines print out the paper ballot or the copy of the ballot, but but we've got a paper trail in addition to the electronic. It's not either or. We don't have to go back to the old days. Although some people think that the old machines, are actually the most accurate, the ones with the gears and everything that measure everything. But and you got it instantly, right? But who knows if that's the most accurate? But anyway, I mean, we actually have had that, probably accounting for that 17% of Democrats and whoever else, a little bit of concern about the potential of these machines. So why not have a universal requirement of a paper trail? Why not? It's just Diebold said, "Oh, we can't. That's too expensive. We can't do that." But they also made ATM machines. There's always a paper trail for those. So what was the big issue? So Dominion is a totally different company. I believe that the machines in Georgia do have a paper trail. I don't know, about the machines in other places or other ones, but I mean, this is an opportunity for reform, but instead, what we've turned it into is a partisan, time for people to go crazy and not and to invalidate elections and give politicians an excuse to claim that they've been wronged.
And it's funny that I'm glad you ended on that note. Your comments here that people are claiming they've been wronged, because in a way, there's two lanes here of a conversation. One is there are people who are experts in election security and best practices. And if we were talking about policy today, that we would go down that path and we would say, these are some of the experts, these are some of the things that they recommend. Why haven't we done anything about it? Whether it's, at the state level, local, state, or federal. But in reality, not to say in reality, but I think today our focus primarily is on this other lane, which is the folks who are now we are anticipating, based on past behavior for the last 2 years leading straight through to today. I think you and I both are, looking at this New York Times article from last week.
Yes.
We are anticipating that there may be, shenanigans. There may be a continued, escalation and impact that will impair the smooth running of our election. And the reason we say this, and I alluded to it earlier, this Vice presentation online that was released recently, they're interviewing actual people and they're playing voicemails and they're reading emails, and so you're hearing in some cases the voices of the folks who are making death threats to election workers and their family members, bomb threats to election sites. They're sending people pictures, photographs of their homes, their personal homes, their election offices, and saying, "We know where you live." They're contacting election workers' family members on their personal and work emails. So this is intimidation. This is this is rising to the level of crimes. And so for folks who say, threatening, intimidating is not criminal, I just, to a certain extent, I feel like maybe either there are folks who are paying great attention to this but not doing it publicly, or we're not really paying close enough attention. And the consequence, either way, the consequence is that we do have experienced people quitting and retiring. We are putting demands on police forces to protect some of these people, because obviously there are police responses. If someone's going to go online and say X, Y, and Z personal threat to an individual, there's going to be police protection.
There have actually been a few cases that where criminal action has been taken, charges have been filed against individuals.
It's good to hear, because the impact of this can't be understated rather. Lack of experienced staff members is a bigger threat to election integrity than any of the election fraud, unsubstantiated election fraud claims we've heard about the last election. And the reason I say this is because, if you mentioned Mike Lindell, someone else calls him Mike Pillow. A commentator calls him Mike Pillow. I don't mean to make light of his line of business, but it's just how I picture him in my head. Anytime I see his name, I picture Mike Pillow.
I think he goes by the Pillow Guy.
The Pillow Guy. There you go. I mean, if he's making bank, more power to him. But so he was interviewed by New York Times, and this is a quote. Setting up their interview of him. They said, "Perhaps the most pressing problem nationwide is a barrage of requests for election records, from photocopies of ballots to images of absentee ballots, envelopes, and applications," end quote. So they interviewed him, and they said, he's promoting seminars nationwide, providing people with guidance on how to file these requests. And to the New York Times, he claimed that he has there have been over 1,000 jurisdictions where people that he has trained have filed these requests around the country. There's only about 3,300 counties. So that means he and his people have a very big footprint. And just what does this even mean? Well, in many cases, these electronic records have to be have the personal identifying information redacted manually.
Yes.
So that could be tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of places where election workers have to go in. But they're also, in some cases, they're trying, not Mike personally, but other people who are engaged in obstruction of the electoral process. In many cases, the old age-old trick of having voter registries purged. But here's one that's a new one that I hadn't heard before. In some cases, they're recommending that their supporters who question election integrity here, mind you, they're recommending they show up 15 minutes before the polls close so that they can overwhelm the process, cause confusion, and cast doubt on the proper functioning and administration of elections.
Yes.
So to a certain extent, they're encouraging the very dysfunction that they're claiming to be against.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I said, in Georgia, they passed a law that prevents you from bringing food and water to people within a certain distance of the polls, right? I mean, they're doing everything they can to suppress the vote. There's no doubt that this is a Trojan horse aspect to it, but that doesn't mean everything they're saying is wrong, because some of what they're saying are, as I discussed earlier and you discussed, that are claims that left-wing reform-oriented people have been saying for years. So it's just, but what's happened now is that not even just Trump anymore, but every, wingnut Republican that loses an election is claiming it was stolen from them now, in Arizona, everywhere. And so this is an ongoing problem. We may end up discussing it more as we get closer to the election, but so far it's not a problem in Humboldt County.
Thankfully.
One of the worst, most damaging decisions in modern history.
We could pass a law to protect every woman's right to an abortion, and we should do that.
If this turns out to be the opinion of the court and it's issued, it could have a major impact on the outcome of this election.
Whoever committed this lawless act knew exactly what it could bring about.
Whoever did this leak should be prosecuted and should go to jail for a very long time. This has shaken the independence and the ability of the judiciary to function.
If the rationale of the decision as released were to be sustained, a whole range of rights are in question.
Okay, second segment, abortion versus the economy. As we've discussed on this show, while the Dobbs decision has been horrific in terms of for women's rights and its impact on the country and the potential loss of privacy and the complete change of direction of the Supreme Court, it has been a godsend for Democratic candidates. It has, as we've talked about, the young women are registering in record numbers, and in every special election since Dobbs, the Democrats have outperformed the polls. In 2020 it was the opposite. Trump always outperformed the polls in most states because of what they called the Trump factor that we've discussed on this issue. Well, since June, every single special election, the Democratic candidates haven't always won it, but they've done better than the polls indicated they would. I think by like a minimum of 4 points. So abortion rights seems to be a winning issue for them. But there are some in the Democratic Party who, both for strategic reasons and also for big picture reasons, including Bernie Sanders, are saying, we really need, it's important that not that the abortion issue isn't important, but we really need to not make this a one issue election. We shouldn't make our closing argument about Dobbs, about the rights. We also need to focus on the economy, which is, what was the Raging Cajun in 1992? You had the sign in front of them. It's the economy, stupid, and they should be out there touting James Carville. Thank you. They should be out there touting these economic success while talking about what they're going to be doing to deal with inflation, but also not avoid a recession. Bernie Sanders thinks that Democrats should be talking more about that, where they're kind of avoiding it. Now, it's being framed in the media where I've seen as an either or. Obviously, it's not. The question is, what do you make as your primary argument? And some people are saying make your primary argument Dobbs, because that's what's winning elections right now. Bernie Sanders, of course, has broader interests. He worries about the soul of the party. He worries about what the party stands for and its long-term prospects.
So it's interesting that you mentioned, it's not an either or. It's about priorities. But I have read recently that about $200 million have gone to Democratic candidates on the abortion issue. So it's coming from someone who's managing money flows has made this their case, like this. They believe this is the way to do it. So I'm going to give the counter argument first, and then sort of reveal a silver lining. I mentioned that I looked at a Pew Research recent study that was released. I believe it was called, one of the headline of the study was "Economy Remains Dominant Midterm Voting Issue, but Abortion Grows in Importance." So if you just look up Pew, that's you'll get the data yourself. There's lots of crosstabs, etc. But they were asking, the study was the percentage of registered voters who say an issue is very important to them, and it compares two time frames comparing March to August. So this came out in August, in September, I guess, just based on, so it's not as current as it could be. It's about a month old, but big picture, abortion has risen significantly as a priority since the Dobbs decision. So it has gone from 43% to 56% in terms of people who self-report that it is a very important issue to them. But the economy is by far the highest single priority issue for people by a significant margin. So that's like 77%. Basically nearly 8 in 10 people, 4 out of 5 people put that as their most important issue, and that's way higher than in the other core group of interest topics. But
let me just ask you something, David, because real quick, and then I'll let you finish. It's one thing to say that the majority of people, it's the biggest topic of importance, but what will necessarily bring in more votes to win is sometimes a different question, because a lot of people are fixed on what they either believe inflation is the Democrats' fault or the Republicans' fault, or they believe that unemployment reduction is more important than dealing with inflation, or they've got a view of the economy that says that it's nobody's fault. They all say it's the most important issue because everybody's suffering. But is there potential to gain or lose votes based on the economy as opposed to abortion bringing in a totally new set of voters? And that's just a question I put to you.
Yeah, no. So it's perfect timing, because when I looked at this data and this study, what I was thinking is, where's the energy here? Where's the change? What has changed over time? And so I dug a little bit deeper, and what I was thinking is, we're talking about the Democratic Party looking to encourage Democratic voter participation in the process. Energize the base. This is what they claim is their priority, which, someone like Bernie Sanders, or even, myself, probably even you, we would say, if you educate the broad spectrum of people, bring persuasive, informed information to them, you can bend the curve. But that's not what the Democratic Party does. They're looking to mobilize the base. And so this data detail, what you see is, if you look at March to August for Democrats, it rises significantly. So instead of it being just 43 to 56 for everybody, for Democrats it goes from 46 to 71, which makes it like that's almost as high as 77, which is the highest number for anybody on any issue for either group. meaning that it will, in fact, or at least should, in fact, be an effective issue at mobilizing the Democratic base to turn out and vote. Versus just for comparison's sake, for GOP voters, abortion before Dobbs, 41% said it was important. After Dobbs, 40% said it was important.
Yeah, because
That's
people
consistent.
didn't think it would be overturned. Abortion has never been a motivating issue on the left because everybody thought it was safe.
And the last thing I'd say about this before kind of letting you pivot to something different is that, so beyond mobilizing the base, this is the other half of your question. What are the rest of the people doing? Like, so people who say approximately, I think it's like 40, I'm just going to use round numbers because 16, right? So approximately 42% of people say, oh, I'm going to vote Democrat, and approximately 42% of people, or 43% say they're going to vote, Republican. So it's slightly leaning Republican, but it's really the base that's getting mobilized here. But who else are out there? Well, the interesting thing is that 10% of people still say they're unsure. So there's an up for grabs population right there. But then 4% of people say they're willing to cross party lines. I didn't drill down into like the minutia of who said they were going to draw across party lines and how do they self-identify. But in theory, what we're seeing is that there are at least some people who might be the target audience of this abortion messaging, which is, now it has become an issue. Or alternatively, there are people who are the economy is so important to them, and they're so distraught in the current climate that would be the other reason. So it's not clear about the 4%, but that just leaves 14% of people who are out there that may be the marginal difference. But again, just to reiterate, the Democratic Party wants to mobilize their base and get turnout. And I think that, in fact, I don't agree with one issue being the, be all end all, but at least there's some merit in what they're saying. And I'll talk about the economy separately.
Again, if young women are voting, younger people in general, but especially young women are voting in larger numbers, that's generally considered good news for Democrats, but they don't fit into the formulas that most pollsters, and probably to their detriment, is probably how they got in trouble with Trump, are, have as their likely voter models, because a lot of it is based on past behavior, on who voted in the election before and the election before that. And I've marveled that so many pollsters don't want to change that methodology, because each election is different. It has different dynamics. Trump brought in a bunch of people who don't normally vote, right? But they didn't stick around for the midterms. They really just wanted to vote for Trump. So in 2018, there really wasn't a Trump factor at all, even though he was calling for people to vote. 2020, there was again. So if there's got to be a dynamic approach to likely voters from election to election. And are there any pollsters out there that are trying to incorporate this? And I know it's short term and not a lot of data, but it's been happening since June. So are they taking this into account? But they claim to have been taking it into account in 2020, and they didn't do much better than they did in 2016 in some state polls. But so the question is what are the likely voters? And if this is the case, then the Democrats obviously want to focus on a message, whether or not it's the closing argument. They just want to focus on it. I mean, we can talk about Prop 1, which I've said on the show I think is performative. We already have abortion protection in this state. It's going to be redundant. Why are we doing this? Because Democrats want to turn out young women, especially, and others too, who are going to think that they're voting to protect abortion when it really is going to have zero legal effect. The ballot analyst even said that. No direct fiscal impact. It's not going to change anything. So it's just, but they want to regain their 4 or 5 congressional seats that they've lost since 2018, and they want these groups to turn out, so they put it on the ballot. I think it's manipulative. I wish the Democrats didn't do that, but anyway, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
But obviously it's a winner.
So speaking of other topics, you did mention methodology, how pollsters are able to determine likely voters. Nate Silver from 538 that's probably, the secret sauce, that he's got all kinds of things he's written over the years about that. I think each and every polling entity is trying to find a way to be more accurate, and they're more or less successful. But I'm going to take a slightly different tack here. I was looking for what survey bodies, entities, organizations were picking one issue, as opposed to this is a very important issue, and then you could give multiples. But I was wondering which organizations out there were having just one, and so I found Siena's most recent survey. They were asking for one. What's the one most important issue? And 41% of people said economy. The next highest, 15%, said threats to democracy. 14% said abortion, 7% said immigration, 6% said gun policy. So if it doesn't take a rocket scientist. The 2 and 3 are likely Democratic voters, and the 4 and 5 are likely Republican voters.
Sure.
Oversimplification, but still, that leads to the fact that economy is really quite important for nearly the majority, not quite 41% of people. So it really is an important issue. So I went digging a little further and said, well, what did Gallup say about the economy being an important issue? And Frank Newport, who I actually had the privilege of meeting once before in my prior career in survey research, really, really bright guy. I really trust his judgment. He's like, I forget his title, but he's like the head of one of the top survey researchers at Gallup. And what he said was, and he published this, it's available out there on the Gallup website. He said, economy and inflation are America's most important issues. Multiple surveys have revealed this. Legislation has been passed to address it, this Inflation Reduction Act, and data show that the majority of Americans approve of that bill. And while Americans would like to see government spending go down, because we borrow 40 cents of every dollar that we spend in our country, Americans mostly approve of spending, extraordinary spending that occurred during the COVID pandemic. And that has sort of led to this precarious situation where we are with so much money leading to inflation, et cetera. So he actually provides a proscription. And I won't get into all the details about it, but basically it's like assure people that you're focused on the economy and making every effort to improve it. Promote policies to reduce energy costs, reduce overall spending, and or explain how the spending will grow the economy. Invest in policies that will produce alternative energy and mitigate climate change. And then the unstated premise there is, and tell people you're doing it because you just passed this bill to spend unprecedented billions of dollars in this exact thing. And then finally, do what's possible to ensure inflation is kept in control while maintaining employment and growth. Obviously, that last one is a wish list item, but it's not rocket science. If Democrats really did want to say, we know what the problem is, we've passed the legislation to address it, these are the things we are doing, it could be done. Apparently, they don't think that they can make the case effectively enough to rebuild confidence in the economy, their handling of the economy.
It is a very tricky one. When there's a saying in law, when you're explaining, you're losing, and you got to do a lot of explaining for that. And that's things you do kind of in between campaigns. You don't try to do it. But on the other hand, they're going to be in the debates, and they've got to say. But they don't have to even say all that much. They say we passed the bill. No, it won't hurt inflation because it's spread out over 10 years, and it's going to help with the conversion of the economy that we need towards a cleaner and safer place. They don't have to say a whole lot about it. They can just brag about it. They don't have to get into the weeds. That's part of the problem where Democrats get into trouble is they feel like they've got to explain everything in detail. People just don't want to hear you say, yeah, okay, no, this is what we did. And I think that's fine. But it's hard. I think that Democrats were slipping in the polls a little bit in September because they lost focus of that. They're coming back now. A little bit in some of them because the campaigns are in particular Fetterman and the rest are refocusing on the fundamentals. Don't just attack your opponent, but talk about what you stand for. And it can't be just we want to restore abortion. But anyway, I mean, we'll probably be discussing aspects of that as we get closer to the election.
The question of whether I would do it again, though, is No.
You wouldn't do it again?
I wouldn't. I didn't fully comprehend the level to which this former administration and the people around it would go. The difference between the politics that you're talking about in terms of the last, 40 years is a very different game. And I don't ever want to, again, to hand a weapon to people that would use it in a illegitimate way that they've used the weapon of me against my dad. You don't need the laptop. You got a book. You get the book. It's all in the book. And I don't know. I truly.
You don't know.
The serious answer is that I truly do not know the answer to that. But you read the book and you'll realize that I wasn't keeping tabs on possessions very well for about a 4-year period of time.
Hunter Biden. We haven't really discussed Hunter Biden on this show. And maybe that's because we're part of the liberal media cabal that just wants to not talk about it at all because we're so scared that the revelations of Hunter Biden are going to do in the Democratic Party forever. I mean, it's just like, and of course, this guy, son, got a lot of problems, kind of an idiot, brought his laptop in, didn't recover, don't go back for it. They illegally tore into it and have discovered a lot of very semi-interesting things. At first, they sounded interesting, but when you look at them, it's really not that big of a thing. Basically, he received an inordinate amount of money from Burisma for what? What is his skill? What is he bringing to the table? Well, everybody says, obviously, he brought access and influence over the vice president and now the president, and that's what this firm was buying. Well, maybe that's what the firm thought they were buying, but my understanding is all he got was, for a couple of them, was like a 5-10 minute discussion on the tarmac of an airport with Biden before Biden loaded up onto a plane. And I think what it shows is that Hunter Biden is a BS artist who oversold his influence to a company that maybe was a little bit ignorant of the politics and didn't realize that until then nobody knew who the hell Hunter Biden even was, let alone that he would have influence. And of course, there's a reference to the big guy in the Chinese company documents, but there's no smoking gun because there's nothing there. And so, of course, it's been all over Fox News. The minute that Mar-a-Lago was raided, the cry of the right was at first, this was planted. It was the FBI is acting inappropriately. And then after a few days, when it started to look like this was more serious than they thought, it was, well, what about Hunter Biden? I mean, all the time. It's like you bring up, when in doubt, bring up Hillary Clinton's emails or Hunter Biden's laptop. I mean, it's been the source of a lot of comedy and the rest. And I'm going to tell you right now, I'll tell you in a minute, but I want you to get into this, but I want to come back and I want to explain why in Ukraine, the claim that Biden, because he actually was instrumental in getting a Ukrainian prosecutor fired, basically, and replaced by another one. I'm going to tell you why that actually contradicts rather than supports the theory, the conspiracy theories that the right is putting out. But I want to bring you in.
So I like our new long format because we have like 3 lanes already. I hate to use this overuse this simile here, but so first I'll just deal with the however you want to call it, the meaty sort of shocking pieces of this story that just keep getting regurgitated, the GOP claims regarding corruption in business dealings, and I'll keep it this piece real short. I just looked at a whole BBC release about this that had a lot of detail, but the short version, just to kind of explain really briefly, yes, Hunter Biden did have a lucrative consultancy business. He was involved in raising investment funds on behalf of pools of investors with political connections, and he, again, according to BBC, and he did have business dealings with energy sector companies in China and Ukraine. That's all pretty innocuous. There are sensational details too that kind of say, oh my goodness, but what about the dollar amounts involved? His one company alone had $11 million in revenue in a very short period of time. He at one point had a $200,000 per month lavish lifestyle spending, and he currently has a $2 million loan he's working to pay back to a Hollywood-connected lawyer in California to help him pay his back taxes that he owes. So that's all. Wow, look at all this money. There must be something terrible. That seems probably also innocuous. And then finally, as of the article's publication, there was no evidence of any impropriety at any level with any of these connections. So really, this kind of circles back to, well, why is this a headline now? Why is this something that we're paying attention to? I think the way you framed it originally to me was, is the media covering up a scandal? And I think to a certain extent, the cover up is the scandal. And that was during the election of 2020 when it was called misinformation and disinformation. And I think one of the quotes was, this closely resembles a Russian disinformation campaign. And yes, there were Russian troll farms that were using Facebook and other social media to amplify the conspiracies about Hunter that could have threatened Biden's fair election potential outcome.
And to add to that, shortly before the Hunter Biden scandal broke out, the FBI warned social media that another barrage was coming. Probably coincidence, because I don't think they knew anything about the laptop at that time. But that has fueled a lot of conspiracy theories. They said, oh well, they told the social media people not to cover the laptop, but no, there's no mention of it in their testimony and in their interviews. What's the Facebook guy's name again?
Zuckerberg. Mark
Zuckerberg. He didn't mention that the laptop was brought up at any time. He just said that about a week or two before, FBI team came to him and said, "You're about to be hit by a Russian misinformation campaign."
So there are all these social media companies, especially the ones with lots of money like Facebook. They do rely on experts to say, "Hey, what are the things that we ought to be flagging?" And we all, in the context of COVID, we know that there are discrepancies about this. This is a social media censorship conversation. And I'd like to steer it back towards Hunter Biden. So I just wanted to point out that that's the bigger issue to me than Hunter Biden himself. So the reason we're talking about this week, besides the fact that our Republican friends and colleagues are talking about it, is because we want to kind of set the record straight here. The Washington Post has said that anonymous sources within the federal agents have evidence that there may be charges forthcoming for tax evasion for undeclared income and false statements related to gun purchases. A gun purchase rather, but that the DOJ and the U.S. Attorney in Delaware is yet to decide about prosecution, whether there will be criminal or civil charges against him, and they've already appointed back in 4 years ago David Weiss, who was nominated by Trump in late 2017. He's supervising the case. So a Trump-nominated U.S. attorney at the DOJ will be the person deciding if these charges get dropped or not, or charged. They proceed rather, and then separately the tax division would pick up the tax issues. So the idea that the consultancies or the businesses themselves are somehow corrupt, there's nothing here at all about that. It's more about did Hunter get effective tax advice? Well, you know what? I think lots of people who make a lot of money, there's, they say if you have a bunch of auditors look at the same person, none of them are going to come at it in the same way as that person's own tax lawyer would. So taxes aside, because that's outside the scope of what we really know or understand. The gun purchase issue, I can speak to that because I think it's pretty clear cut. The timing of the purchases, the purchase that correlated to when Hunter purchased a gun and submitted the paperwork, it's the same time frame from when he admitted to smoking crack cocaine in a book he wrote about substance abuse. So that's the thing. That's the big catch here, is that, in the same year that he tried to buy a gun, that's the same year that he filled out that application, and he said, he was asked, quote, "Are you an unlawful user or addict of a controlled substance?" He said no, but he said when in fact he's already admitted. So that's the smoking gun, so to speak. Right. This is known by prosecutors as lying and buying, which happens all the time. And prosecutors have discretion. Typically, they'll make a deal under such circumstances. I personally have a friend who did this, not on this exact charge, but it was something slightly different. In his gun application, he just didn't wasn't literate enough in the form bureaucracy, and he made a mistake, and he was called into the local state police office where they read him his rights, and they said, hey, there's this form, you check this box, and be very careful with what you say. And he said, I made a mistake. And they're like, all right, cool. And they let him go. So like it's treated differently depending on what the circumstances are. I'll just say this. Hunter Biden's lawyer, Chris Clark, said he accused the investigators of leaking information to the media. And here's his quote. He said, it is a federal felony for a federal agent to leak information about a grand jury investigation such as this one. Any agent you cite as a source in your article apparently has committed such a felony. So this is a highly much politicization about something that is not really related to the types of claims that have been made since 2020.
All right. I just wanted, while we have time, the centerpiece of the conspiracy theory is that Joe Biden, in fact, leveraged $1 billion in aid to Ukraine to persuade them to oust the top prosecutor, Victor Shokin. The theory is that, well, he was investigating Burisma, and this is to protect his son and his son's interests, right? The problem is that Shokin had closed the investigation of Burisma by the time this happened. Biden was not alone in wanting this prosecutor out. There were multiple governments in Europe and elsewhere that were complaining that this prosecutor was corrupt and not investigating politicians and not investigating companies like Burisma. If anything, this was a symptom of it. And when he did this, and when he was replaced by Yuri Lutsenko, he ran the risk of if he was really concerned about Burisma, of it being reopened. Shokin had no intention of reopening it, but because of all the politics and intrigue, Lutsenko decided, told him, pull the file. I want to take a look at that file. It could have gotten reopened. It didn't. Lutsenko decided it was a nothing burger and put it back down again. And part of the other real defect in this conspiracy theory, the centerpiece of it, is that what Burisma was being investigated for had nothing to do with Hunter Biden. It was transactions that completely preceded his involvement with the company. So this is just, when Fox News puts this stuff out and doesn't provide the full context and caveat, they are misleading. And I have seen some reporting on this that is extremely irresponsible. We complain about, the biases of Fox News, but that was not just bad journalism, but arguably corrupt journalism, because there's no way they could have missed those parts of the story and still be saying this. But there's still a lot of people you get on social media. Well, Biden got rid of the prosecutor that was going to investigate him. No, it did not happen. It was the opposite. He actually brought in somebody who might have investigated if there was anything there, and again, had nothing to do with Biden, no matter what.
Yeah. So I think for folks, and you were very clear about it, I'm just going to repeat what you said again. During the 2020 campaign, the claim is that data on the laptop showed evidence of unethical or possibly illegal business deals, however, Joe Biden and his supporters denounced this as a smear. And so it was truly the case that Hunter's past work for Ukrainian gas company while his father was vice president, was something that could have been clarified in real time. But instead, it became part of this people talking past each other. Though you spelled it out in just a couple of minutes. There was a person who was accused of not investigating corruption at all, and Joe Biden pushed pretty hard to have this person replaced by someone who would investigate corruption hard. That should have ended this whole thing right there, but it didn't. And then I'll just kind of fast forward to just this past March. The reason this is coming up again now, the Washington Post reported that 2 computer security experts reviewed thousands of emails purportedly from Hunter Biden's computer and found that they were authentic communications based on cryptographic signatures. I'm quoting here. Cryptographic signatures from Google and other technology companies. So they do know that this was really his laptop, or at least that's the story.
Yeah, no, it was his laptop. Everybody's understands that now.
So the fact that it was labeled as misinformation, disinformation, and removed from polite society is something worth talking about. That's a different issue than what actually happened. So I feel bad for Hunter Biden here, and he's had a lot of tragedy in his life, including drug addiction, loss of family members. It's been hard, but he's also, he's a big boy. He's got his own, responsibilities for his actions. He said this. This is his quote. I take this matter very seriously, and I'm confident that a professional and objective review of these matters will demonstrate I handled my affairs legally and appropriately, including with the benefit of professional tax advisors. He's basically saying, like, I did what everybody else did. I know what I did do, and I know what I didn't do, and let's just see where the chips fall. And I think that's a pretty stand-up thing to be saying at this time.
Yeah, well, I'll just go back to what I said at the beginning. If anybody has a gripe with Hunter Biden, it's probably Burisma, who probably feels defrauded by now. I mean, what they paid him was irrational for any skill or anything he had to offer by way of fundraising. This just wasn't, and it didn't even happen. They clearly wanted him to give them some type of influence or access, but he didn't have it. He didn't have it to give. His father, and probably as a favor to him, met with these guys on the thing so he could kind of show off, but there was no follow-up from it. And that's by every account out there. There's nobody that comes up with anything else. So all they have is the theory that Shokin got fired because Burisma wanted him to do it, but it wasn't in Burisma's interest. It wasn't in Biden's interest, to get rid of Shokin if there was any corruption, because again, he was refusing to investigate corruption. He didn't, for whatever reason, whether it was corruption or he just didn't want to take people on. Who knows? We don't know the politics of that. I don't anyway. But again, it has been discussed. The FBI is investigating it. They've come up with possible tax evasion and the lie and buy, as you did, but no grand scheme to give China or Ukraine influence over Biden. And it's certainly not what's fueling this war. The more extreme the theories do that. So anyway, we are not burying the story. We covered it right here on Access Humboldt. So
there you go.
All right, that brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us today?
I'm going to try to continue the theme here and talk about Senate races, and I'm going to talk about the Pennsylvania Senate race. So currently, Real Clear Politics indicates that the 8-point gap that was closing over the last month has now stabilized at a 4% gap, with Fetterman still ahead. They're both losing support as the election gets closer, but the gap is staying the same. And so the reason that I'm willing to call this right now, I just think the real issue that impacted the perceptions of Fetterman's electability was his medical fitness for office after suffering a stroke. I'd seen him speak publicly a few times where he really was having a very hard time putting a sentence together, which I think raised suspicions about his fitness. The recovery was suspect, or at least the rate of progress was suspect, but improvements have now been noticeable. And he's now doing this really slick PR campaign. He just came up with this phrase: when January comes around, my health will recover, but Dr. Oz will still be a fraud. And so that's actually sticking pretty good. One other thing is that they put together a little video showing comparing Dr. Oz to the quack Dr. Nick on The Simpsons, and it's gotten 1.5 million views already. Yeah. Just kind of making light of Dr. Oz's promoting shady products and miracle cures, and I think that'll hit home, and it'll start to solidify his lead. So I'm making the prediction that Fetterman will win the Pennsylvania Senate seat.
Well, I made that call back in July, and I'm going to stick with it. I do say that if there's any chance of him failing is if he chokes up and shows that he can't handle the debate. His performance at the debate is going to be key. But I'm going to be real quick. I'm calling a race for a Republican. Beto was trying to make a good challenge against Abbott. Abbott has got all kinds of vulnerabilities, but Texas just isn't ready yet. I think in your prior analysis, Beto had kind of blown things with the gun issue by overstating his position, and it's just not coming together. Not even. I mean, not without Abbott trying to lose the race, because Abbott has given all kinds of reasons to do it. I've just not seen enough movement in the polls. There's still a lot of people that are partisan. A lot of Trumpers in Texas. I'm calling it for Abbott. I hope I'm wrong, but anyway. That wraps it up this week. We will be back next week discussing more of these and with more predictions. But until then, stay informed and stay engaged. I said it right.